All right, let's get some more analysis on these developments. Joining me now from Woodbridge, Virginia, is Robert Maginnis. He is a retired lieutenant colonel with the U.S. Army, as well as a Pentagon senior strategist. And from Washington, we have William Lawrence. He's a professor of political science and international affairs over at American University. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you. Colonel Maginnis, let me begin with you. On the one hand, I'm not entirely sure this was a deliberate Russian attack, but on the other, this attack does come at the same time as Russia is launching its biggest wave of missile attacks on Ukrainian cities in more than a month.
Yeah, no doubt. We need to be cautious. We need to look and see what residue is from these rockets. Was it deflected by an air defense system? Was it in close to a target that perhaps given the line of sight? I'm sure we have a pretty good idea as to where everything was launched from, and certainly the trajectory that they took to this particular target. But once we get all of this data, then there'll have to be a policy decision as to whether we go forward. Now, I heard the Iron Dome issue. These were likely cruise missiles that really hug the earth, not like Katyusha rockets that Hezbollah perhaps has used against the Israelis, which Iron Dome has been very effective against. So though they need a better air defense system in Ukraine, I don't think that right now is the solution. We'll just have to wait and see.
We'll get into the policy matters in just a bit, but William Lawrence, let me ask you the same question.
Well, I agree with everything that was just said. I can add a couple of data points I think are important. Number one, Article 4 of NATO should be invoked, which is the investigatory part. That must be invoked after this attack. I did look at what the Russians were attacking today, and the nearest target I can find is 118 kilometers away. And so there really doesn't seem to be any credence in terms of what I've seen at my distance so far today of an actual Ukrainian target that was trying to be hit. The fact that it struck a grain facility, given all of the arguments about food, and given that it killed people and it was such a direct hit, suggests to me that it was deliberate. Whether or not from Putin or from a commander in the field, I don't know, but there's a lot of message sending that's been going on around this conflict, and an escalation that's absolutely going on. And let me also say that this morning, Poland nationalized a bunch of Russian oil and gas facilities, Gazprom facilities, and it could have been retribution for that. So there's a lot of aspects of the story that suggest to me that it was deliberate, but I agree entirely. There should be no escalation until a full investigation takes place.
Fair enough. William, I mean, when you look at the map, and if we can pull that up, I mean, it's not difficult to see that the Ukrainian city of Lviv is fairly close to where the missile landed in Poland. And we know that Lviv had been targeted in the past.
Well, Lviv is 50 from the border, and this is 118 away, and there really was nothing in between that I could find. Now, that means nothing. I'm just sitting here in my office, looking at the targets and wondering. And this is the investigation that should go on. But nothing I've seen indicates to me that it wasn't deliberate. On the other hand, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that Russia, is sending mismatches. For example, oil continues to flow through the Russian pipeline to Poland, even though they cut off the gas since last April. So, Russia has mismatched messages going on here. But one thing's for sure, Putin's escalating right now, and everyone should beware.
Colonel Maginnis, let me come back to you. You mentioned something that caught my attention, and that is that we need to actually look at the residue very carefully. I'm just wondering that if Ukrainian anti-artillery wouldn't that be Russian made? I mean, this would make it extremely difficult to actually find out who fired it or not.
Well, the forensics are important here. Clearly, overhead with satellite imagery and other technology that we have, we probably know where the rockets came from, the missiles came from, and also if the air defense engaged. So the deflection argument, I think in time, forensically can be set aside. Now, I think Certainly politically, as you indicated, Putin has a very clear agenda here. He's escalated today, going after certainly the electrical grid once again and hitting major cities across Ukraine. That may have been his response to what Zelensky dropped there in Bali, Indonesia, with regard to a peace plan. Now, back and forth, the politics of this is going to go on for some time, but clearly it seems to me that with the loss of Kherson and, of course, the response that we're now getting from the Russians, this would appear as if we're going to have a long, cold winter for everyone involved.
Robert Maginnis, I want to tap into your expertise. I mean, there have been numerous reports in the past that the Russians were sort of running low on precision guided munitions. I mean, if this is a Russian missile, I mean, could it be perhaps an older, less precise missile?
Well, you certainly have an error with some of the older rockets that the Russians have, and it is quite possible that it could be off by miles. Now, of course, as indicated, we're talking about 15 miles inside Poland. Is that possible? It's possible, but only time and the forensics will give us the truth about this.
Okay. William, let me turn back to you. We know that there's been communications between the United States and Russia throughout this conflict. In fact, just 24 hours ago, the head of the CIA and the Russian intelligence met in the Turkish capital in Ankara. And I think we don't know the exact details, but it was basically to warn the Russians that nuclear weapons should not be used. What do you think is going on between Moscow and Washington right now?
Russia is escalating and it's looking for excuses. It's looking for ways out. There's a number of sort of logical flows I could walk through here about how Putin gains from escalating and getting a NATO response and even justifying threats of nuclear use or potential nuclear use. The whole narrative of this being a proxy war with NATO, a war that NATO started, even though Russia reacted. This is, of course, what they're saying. All of this is reinforced. The Russian propaganda is reinforced by if this sort of goes a certain way. Now, that's why the Biden-Xi meeting on Monday is so important, because Xi's been clear privately and now clear publicly that China will not countenance a use of nuclear weapons. The international community is unanimous on that. So this is all good. And those messages mean that, ironically, Putin is approaching a way out, because after he acquired all this territory that he then lost, it's looking more and more like eventually Russia will have to make a deal in which it concretizes its loss of territory as well as its gains of territory, and all of this, the international community uniting against the use of nuclear weapons, messages from China, all of that. Means that Putin gets a bit of a way out with this NATO mobilization. But again, I don't think Putin's really at the end game yet. He's in the escalation mode right now. He's in the trying to dominate the narratives mode right now. And things just, I think, went badly for Russia today, even though they'll do their best to capitalize on a bad circumstance.
This escalation mode and trying to control the narrative has led to Article 4. I mean, Colonel Maginnis, let me ask you, I mean, in the 73 years, I think, since NATO was founded, member nations have activated Article 4 of the treaty, I think about a half dozen times. I mean, the latest instance was back on February 24th when Russia invaded Ukraine that very same day. What do you think it's going to mean now?
Well, it's really up to the Polish prime minister whether or not, he's going to press for this. And of course, he spoke with Mr. Biden evidently earlier in the day. So when you kind of juggle all this, we have to, look at what, Biden said to Xi, what Xi has said to Putin, Lavrov was over in Bali and he responded to what Zelensky had said. So when you throw all that in the air, where do we end up? I suspect, given that the Russians did not apologize or take responsibility for so-called errant missiles, that in fact it was probably done on purpose, but that's speculation on my part. If it was on purpose, it was intended to check NATO's resolve. Is NATO serious about, escalating any further? And I think, Putin is quite frankly desperate. And he has to figure out how he can get out of this with it still, something to brag about to his own people. These are tough times for him.
Okay, William Lawrence, I have about a minute left, and I want to ask you the final question. Pretty much everybody is in Bali right now for the G20. What do you think could be discussed? We know that France has called for a meeting amongst these members as well.
A new consensus on doubling down against Russia, a stronger statement coming out of the G20. Just not to put too fine a point on it, but Article 4 should be invoked. That's consultations. Article 5 is the defense, which is what you were referring to. And there's no question that the Article 5 mobilizations that are already happening and the Article 4 consultations, which need to go further, are happening. So the only question here is what will be the Polish response with NATO behind it. And there, I think there's a lot of things that can be done, particularly in the area of air defense, training, and other ways to, help the Ukrainians better defend themselves.
We'll leave it there. Professor William Lawrence, thank you very much. Colonel Robert Maginnis, thank you very much as well.